Hello everyone and welcome to the first round of the Tara Steel Chess Tournament in Wijk aan Zee, the Netherlands. In this video we'll have a look at the game between Vidit and Sam Shankland. So Vidit with the white pieces, Sam with the black pieces. Vidit, very strong grandmaster from India. He's rated 27-27 and Sam rated 27-08. So Vidit started the game off with the move 1d4, Sam played knight f6, c4 by Vidit, and Sam plays the Nimzo. So e6, knight c3, and here usually the Nimzo continues with the move bishop e4. Now I don't know exactly what Vidit had planned here. The main moves are moves like queen to c2 or f3. It's also a main move to prepare e4 or moves like knight f3 and e3. Anyway, white has many options here, but Sam chose the move d5, transposing into the queen's gambit declined. So Vidit took on d5, Sam recaptured, and Vidit played bishop to g5, pinning the knight on f6. So Sam played c6, strengthening his center. These moves are all very natural. Vidit played e3, bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, and h3. Now this move might seem a bit surprising, but it has a lot of ideas. So first of all, white is stopping the development of this bishop here. And in some lines, white does want to play bishop f4 and make sure that he can keep this bishop on this diagonal. Anyway, Sam played knight to e8, Vidit played bishop to f4, and Sam played bishop d6. So he wants to trade off these dark square bishops. So Vidit's like, okay, you can trade them, but I want to trade on my terms. So he goes queen to f3, Sam goes queen to f6. So trying to go for massive trades. Vidit once again is like, okay, trades are fine, but on my terms. He goes knight g2. So Sam takes, Vidit recaptures with the knight. Sam plays knight at d6, and this is all looking pretty standard. But here Vidit decides to go h4. So the h4, with the move h4, he's signaling that he wants to play aggressively here. If he wanted to have a slow game, he could have just castled here, but the game would have been approximately even. Sam would have probably played something like bishop f5, try to trade off these bishops. Actually not right away, because white is a tactic. Because you hit the queen, queen goes here, 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 and white wins 2 pawns. I guess we all saw that. So, because of that, Sam would play something like rook e8 first, and then bishop to f5. And the game is pretty even. Maybe white's a tiny bit better. But Vidit went to move h4. He wants to play aggressively, and after move h4, it's unlikely that he's going to castle kingside, and more likely that he's going to castle queenside and go for an attack on the enemy king. So Sam played rook to e8, Vidit castled, and now Sam went bishop to f5. So Vidit traded, Sam recaptured, and Vidit played g4, expanding his pawns on the queenside. Queen f6, g5, queen f5, and here a bit of a surprising move. Vidit played queen h3. Now you might be wondering, like, why does Vidit do that? Because he has these pawns pushed up, but it's not that easy for white to create an attack here on the king side. Because if you go h5, then you're going to hang this pawn, right? And you could prepare with a move like rook d to g1 to then go h5. But here black is going to go knight to a6, and after h5, knight to b4, and suddenly black is threatening checkmate. So black is getting pretty annoying counterplay here. So that is really the reason why Vidit felt his best chances were in the endgame. So he played queen h3, Sam took, Vidit took with the rook, Sam played knight to d7, b3 by Vidit, restricting the knight jump to c4, Sam played knight e4, trade, and king to d2. And around here, I was doing commentary with Hikaru, and it felt like maybe white was a little bit better, but black is pretty solid. So Sam played rook a8, Vidit played knight e2, and the plan Hikaru and I thought Sam should go for was something like knight b6, and if white makes a random move like, let's say rook here, go knight c8 and put the knight on d6. The knight is always going to be very well placed on the d6 square because it can jump to e4, it's restraining f3, the f3 and e4 push, and it can jump to f5 in some cases, so it really felt like the knight belonged on d6. But instead of that, Sam played rook 4 to e6, knight g3 by Vidit, g6 by Sam, but this gives Vidit the opportunity to open up on the king side with h5. So now he can decide to open up the h file at any good moment. So Sam played c5, rook d h1 by Vidit. Bit of a surprising move. We were expecting the move knight to e2, so in case black trades, white can recapture with the knight. And black suddenly has an isolated pawn. The knight is controlling a lot of nice squares on the d4 square. So knight e2 was sort of the expected move. The knight can always swing around at f4, but rook d h1 was played by Vidit, rook e7 by Sam, and now Vidit all of a sudden went rook c1. So with the rook on e7, he felt that he could enter here on the queen side. So Sam took, Vidit recaptured, and knight f8. So nice move by Sam. He wants to put the knight on e6 eventually, because then he will be hitting the pawn on d4 and the pawn on g5. So Vidit went rook to c5, hitting the pawn on d5. Sam played rook to d6, and now rook c8, pinning the knight on f8. And it's not so easy for black to deal with this, because if black plays something like king g7, white can go h6 and force the king to go back to the back rank, where it will be kind of stuck. Right in here, white can continue with something like knight e2 and maneuver his knight around to the queen side. Anyway, so Sam played rook e d7. Vidit played knight e2, bring the knight back. Now the rook can swing over to the center or the queen side, and the knight can start attacking these pawns over here. Rook d8 by Sam, take, and knight f4. A nice move by Vidit, because it's restraining knight e6 from black. And if black goes knight e6 here, white is going to take, and after takes, take on g6, and then something like rook c3. And rook d7 will be kind of unpleasant for black to deal with. And also he's keeping an eye on the pawn on d5. So suddenly it's not so easy for black here. And Sam played the move f6, and this really puts black in a difficult situation. So Vidit took the pawn, and Sam went king f7. Alright, he could have also played the move g5, but g5 would have been met with rook to g3, pinning the pawn, and after h6, something like knight to g6. Now if black takes, white has two very strong passes here, and this is winning for white. And if black goes something like king f7, white would have given a check, black takes, and rook f3. And suddenly black is in a lot of trouble. I mean, where are you going to go with the king? If you go to e7, I'm going to give a check, pick up the pawn on b7, and that's winning for white. And if you go to e6, then white is going to play something like knight g4. Hit the pawn on h6, prepare rook f6, and black is just almost lost here. So instead of all that, Sam played king to f7, Vidit traded, and now played knight to d3. So Sam recaptures the pawn, but if we compare the pieces here, we see that this knight is very active from white. It's ready to hop into e5. And the black knight on f8 is a bit passive. So Vidit continue with rook f3 check, king e7, and knight e5. So the knight is keeping an eye on the pawn on g6, and white is prepared to go rook f7. And Sam played king e6. And here Vidit, believe it or not, missed a forced win. So you can pause your video and try to figure it out yourself. It's pretty advanced, but the move Vidit should have gone for, alright, I gave you guys enough time to pause your video, is rook to f7. And the idea is that white is hitting this pawn on b7. Now black has a couple options of dealing with that. Black can play rook b8, but now the rook is very passive. Also this knight on f8 is very passive. So what does white do? White goes f4. Now what can black even do? He cannot push up this pawn. He cannot move this knight anywhere. He cannot really move the rook, because then he's going to hang this. And if black just shuffles the king back and forth, white is just going to go king up, and move his king all the way to g5. Eventually this pawn is going to be lost, and white will simply win the game. So black is practically in zugzwang here after f4. He cannot make a move. So now let's have a look at what happens in case black goes knight to d7. Right? I mean, actively blocking the defense, the attack on the pawn on b7. Well, here white's going to take on d7. Black recaptures. We trade everything. And now white goes king to e3, king e6, and king f4. Now if white manages to go king g5, the pawn in game is winning. Let me show you guys real quick. So if a6, we go king up, king f7. And the easiest way to win here would be something like f4. And we go f5. So we trade these pawns, and this way we make way for the king. And we pick up the pawn on d5 and win an extra pawn. This should be an easy win for white. Generally in pawn endgames, if you are up a pawn, the endgame is winning. Now black could play the move king f6 to stop white from marching up the board. But here white is going to play b4. And b4 is very important. Black can play something like g5, king g4, king g6. And here white is going to go f4. And after takes, black has to stop king to e5. So black goes something like king f6. And here white goes a4. And black is simply in zugzwang. If the king steps to this side, we go king e5 and win this pawn. And white is winning. If the king goes to this side, we go here and we outflank the king. The king, once again, will have to keep making moves. And if it goes here, we just go here. Eventually, black is going to end up in zugzwang and he's going to lose this pawn. And the problem for black is that in a position like this, he also cannot play a move like b6. Because if black goes b6, we go b5. And black is in zugzwang. What do we do in case black goes a6? We go a5, and black is once again in Zugzwang. So if the king goes here, we go king up. We just keep outflanking the king. And we're going to pick up this pawn with a win in the endgame. So, I mean, Vidit had a couple minutes here on the clock, so not easy to calculate all of this, but this would have led to a winning endgame. However, what he chose in the game was also a pretty good move. So in the game, Vidit played a4, Sam played a5. So now the difference is, if Vidit goes rook f7, Sam is going to play knight d7, and if takes, 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 king takes, and here there's a difference. Because white has already committed his pawns on the queen side, and look at this pawn on b7. Black has not committed that pawn yet, so black always has this move in reserve. So let's have a quick look. Let's say white goes king up, black goes here, we go king up, king here, king g4, g5, and if white goes f4, black's gonna take, and guess what? And now the move b6. Black waited with this move, because now if white goes here, we just wait with king g6, and it's simply a draw. Right, so in pawn games, very often you want to wait with moves like these until you absolutely have to, because they might come in handy, right, when you have a situation like this one. This is called a mutual Zugzwang. If white is to move, he cannot win, and if black is to move, he loses. All right. So let's have a quick look at what happened in the game. Instead of that, Vidit played king d3, slowly improving the position, and Sam played rook to b8. So Sam eventually wants to create counterplay with the move b5, opening up his rook. So Vidit went rook to f7. A very nice move, once again restricting this knight, because if Sam is giving a move, he also wants to go knight d7 and bring the knight back into the game. So rook f7, g5, rook g7, hitting the pawn. Sam played king to f5, king e3, and here Sam played knight e6, hitting the rook. The knight is ready to hop to f4, and Vidit played rook f7, checkmate. So yeah, just kidding, that's not what happened. In the game, Sam played b6. Right, so the problem for black is it's difficult to make moves in this position. Black would love to play a move like b5, but white can just take. And the problem is, if black recaptures, we give a check, and we win the knight. So black is still kind of tied up. So that's why Sam played b6, Vidit played king f3. Once again, it's tough for black to make a move. So Sam played g4 check, trying to activate his pieces, but Vidit took the pawn, knight e6, hitting the rook and the pawn on d4. But here Vidit played knight e3 check, king f6, and rook g4, saving the rook and the pawn. Now here Sam could have sat passively with someone like knight c7, but the endgame is going to be very tough. After someone like rook h4, we hit the knight, and then this starts hanging again. So instead of that, Sam played b5, making counterplay with his rook. So Vidit took the pawn with check, king f7, and played king to e4, right, activating this king and making way for the f-pawn. So Sam took on a4, Vidit recaptures, rook b2, Vidit played f3, saving the pawn, rook b3 and f4. I also don't know why he played f3 and f4 first, but you know, it's just the way she goes. So rook a3 by Sam, hitting the pawn, and here Sam is at a very nasty trap. If Vidit would have played f5, which looks like a great move, hitting the knight, he had the move knight takes d4, and suddenly things are not so easy for white. Because if white takes the knight, black goes rook takes a4, check, and black wins the rook. And suddenly black might be winning here. So instead of that, Vidit played knight to b6, protecting the pawn. Sam played rook b3, hitting the knight. So Vidit repeated once. He was a little bit low on the clock. So he just wanted to gain a little bit more time and get closer to the time control. Because at move 60, the players are at move 54. They get an additional 15 minutes. Alright, so Sam played rook to a3, and Vidit played king e5, rook takes a4, and now f5, hitting the knight. Now, if black does something like knight takes d4, the easiest way to win for white is always just take the knight. And in such a position, the knight is easily protecting the pawn, so you can just walk your king over, take this pawn with your king, and then use your knight to protect the pawn on f5. So Sam played knight f8, and now a very strong move by Vidit. Vidit played king to d6, and the knight on f8 is suddenly dominated. And what white wants to do is go rook e4, rook to e7, and actually go for some sort of checkmate. If black goes rook here, we're going to go rook e4, and then white has ideas like rook e7. The king has to move back. We go knight f6, king goes here, and rook f7, hitting the knight which is actually kind of trapped. But even if it could move, rook h7 would be checkmate. So this is Vidit's idea. So to stop all of that, Sam goes knight h7. Right, so if white goes rook g4 now, he can jump with the knight, let's say the g5. But here Vidit found a very strong move. He played the move f6. So he's preparing to go rook g7, hitting the king and the knight. And the problem for Sam is if he takes an f6, now there's rook f4. And you're just going to lose this knight. And there's simply nothing black can do. If black moves with the king, we're not going to take with the rook, because black takes the last pawn, and this is a theoretical draw. But Vidit would take with a knight, of course. And he keeps this extra pawn, which he can then later push down the board. Alright, so Sam played king f8. So now white should not go rook g7, because now black can take an f6, and he's fine, because he's removing the defender of the rook. So Vidit played king to e5. Defending the pawn on f6, Sam played rook a1, trying to give some checks with the rook, but Vidit played knight f4, a very strong move. He wants to hop with the knight at e6, and actually create some sort of checkmating ideas. So Sam played rook e1, king f5, king e8, rook g8 by Vidit, knight f8, and here the fastest way to win for Vidit would have been knight to e6 and hitting the knight on e6, but there was still a line to calculate. So here Sam could have taken on e6, but Vidit would take an f8, recaptures and take an e6. And even though black has his passed a pawn, white wins by one move. If black pushes this pawn down the board, we push, we push this pawn, push, we go d7, a1 queen, and d8 queen checkmate, right, due to this pawn on f6. And there's simply nothing black can do about it. If he would go king e8, then we could give a check on f7, for example, and the black king would be forced to go back, and then we go d7 and d8, and white would win. So this would have been a faster way to win, but instead of that, Vidit played d5. He didn't want to calculate this pawn in games. d5 is also winning. He wants to go knight e6 and not have to calculate anything. So Sam played rook to f1, but now d6 by Vidit. Now if Sam pushes his own pawn, Vidit has multiple ways, but one of them is simply check and take the knight, and the rook can always stop this pawn here, and you're going to promote your own pawn. So Sam played rook to d1, stopping the pawn on d6, but now came knight to g6, hitting the knight on f8. Sam gave a check, the king moved over, check, the king moved over, check. But there's simply nothing black can do. This knight is going to be lost, and then these pawns are going to promote. Sam gave a check, king b5, king d7, Vidit took the knight, king takes d6, f7, another check, king a4, king e6, and now a very nice last finesse by Vidit. He went knight to h8, protecting the pawn with the knight. So now he's prepared to go rook to e8 and push his pawn all the way down the board. And so Sam resigned. So a very nice win here for Vidit in the first round of Tata Steel Chess 2022. After the first round, he shares the lead with Jan-Christoph Duda and local hero Jordan van Foreest, who won last year. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.